This is a really interesting take out of RNZ. Should New Zealand treat misogyny as extremism? New Zealand should consider following the UK's lead in classifying a form of misogyny as extremism, an expert says. Politicians have also weighed in, with one saying she does not want to see restrictions on free speech. Can you guess what political party she's from? It comes as the UK Home Office undertakes a review of its counter-extremism strategies in an attempt to crack down on harmful ideologies online and offline. University of Auckland senior lecturer Dr. Chris White said extreme misogynistic violence was increasing globally. Now, it's a very good article by RNZ. It's about 4 minutes long, but they get all sorts of opinions and takes on this. Let's have a bit of a listen.
Misogyny could be considered its own form of extremism under new laws in the UK. It's all part of a review of the country's counter-extremism strategies, targeting hateful ideologies online and offline. So should New Zealand do the same? Ellen O'Dwyer reports.
University of Auckland senior lecturer Dr. Chris Wilson believes extreme misogynistic violence is increasing globally.
The abuse that you see online appears to be increasing. There have been a growing number of violent events that appear targeted at women.
He says the Bondi Junction mall attack, in which Joel Couchy killed 5 women and 1 man, injuring 9 women and 2 men, is an example. Here's New South Wales Police Commissioner Karen Webb speaking to the ABC in the aftermath of the attack.
It's obvious to me, it's obvious to detectives that seems to be an area of interest, that the offender had focused on women and avoided the men. As you know, and has been reported, 5 of the deceased are women, and the majority of victims in hospital are also women.
Police in the UK have described the threat of influencer Andrew Tate to radicalise young boys as a national emergency. The UK government is now considering classifying extreme misogyny in its counter-extremism plans to target harmful ideologies. Chris Wilson says New Zealand should consider doing the same.
This is not about curtailing free speech or placing sanction on people for saying particular forms of speech. It's about being able to identify those individuals who appear to be on a path towards violence.
A New Zealand Security Intelligence Service spokesperson told RNZ the agency already considers violent misogyny under its existing framework. But Chris Wilson is...
I'm interested as well, Chewy. Right, we're talking about violent misogyny, which I guess what they're saying is it's an aspect of misogyny, not just all misogyny overall. And the example they gave about the killing and injuring of, sounds like 90% female to male victims. Is it the killing and the action of harm that is the extremism, or is it the misogyny that's behind it? And how do you legislate on that? So it's really interesting conversation, because if it wasn't misogyny, if it was a woman who had done that towards the other woman, then it would be the action of the death that would be considered the extremism. So is it the action of the deaths, or is it the ideology behind those actions that gets labeled the extremism? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see people in the chat really chewing this over at the moment as well. Like, I think how to form my thoughts. I think they're right in identifying a potential threat.
Yep.
And that the way that, like, people often, there's a couple of people in the chat mentioning Andrew Tate and people of his ilk.
Yeah.
This really toxic form of masculinity, and I guess what we've seen overseas with incels and that sort of thing, that seem to think that the world owes them female companionship, and the only reason that these people haven't been issued a woman is because the unfairness of it all. And overseas, they've had people drive cars into crowds, go on stabbing rampages. There's been attacks on universities and that sort of thing from that ideology. So there is a threat there. There is a risk of that. So speech often leads to action.
Yeah.
And this is why we have conversations about hate speech. I think misogyny or this extreme misogyny comes under that umbrella of hate speech quite handily. And I think it's the discussion of including it in that, I think, is very worthy. And just because something like that hasn't really happened here doesn't mean that we don't get to talk about it before it happens.
No, but I think you've identified the concept, right? Speech leads to actions. So do you criminalize the speech or do you criminalize the actions? Because if people have the speech that doesn't lead to violent actions, so that's where in that continuum do you draw it? I mean, they always talk about hate speech, and they always talk about, but it's credible threats are a crime. So this is I mean, and with me, there's no such thing as a free speech purist. Don't believe anyone who tries to tell you that, right? Everyone has lines somewhere, and my line would always lean towards more speech than less. But there are definitely lines, and this is one of those conversations: is where does society draw that line? Because there's got to be lines somewhere.
Because I mean, look, I haven't spent a lot of time listening to Andrew Tate. I'm certainly aware of him and some of the things that he's spoken about. And I think he is a misogynist, rapist, sex trafficker, just a grab bag of horrible, horrible traits. But I don't know if he has gone to the point of, say, making an active threat or a call to action for people that follow his ideology to do these things.
Yeah.
And I think that's the line that is it's the fuzzy gray line where we go, okay, well, no one has specifically given a call to action or an instruction to people, so then they should be able to say what they like. But we get to that point where people going, I'm not telling people to do this, but certainly wish someone would. The people that know that they can get away with that. And I don't have an answer to that.
Something that intrigues me.
You go too far down that line.
You've brought up that the comedy show about the evangelical American thing. Mike says, would it affect misogyny in religion? That's a really interesting question. Because within some sects, cults, religions, whatever, the way that the man is seen as the absolute authority above all the women, that's a really because I love a religion conversation. That to me is a really interesting conversation. Hey, let's keep going. It's got a couple of minutes to go, and then there's something I want to play you because this does have Nicola Willis in it, and I just want to remind us of what this National Party actually thinks of misogyny. Certainly did think of misogyny before it seems maybe the leader was slapped with a wet bus ticket by all the women, all the females in his cabinet.
Says extreme misogyny deserves its own category so that more resources and attention are directed at stopping it. He believes misogynistic threats against female leaders in New Zealand are increasing.
We saw with Jacinda Ardern, it was the number of death threats. I think 9 were actually brought to court. I mean, that's a major indicator that, no male colleagues.
Yeah, credible. And they were taken to court, they were credible.
Get that.
RNZ approached 2 female academics to speak on misogyny and extremism, who said they couldn't out of fear of the abusive backlash they'd get. Porirua Mayor Anita Baker says she got death threats a couple of years ago when she tried to introduce a paid parking rule in the city. She says she tries to push it to the back of her mind.
Because that's worthy of a death threat. Extra coins in a machine when you park outside the bakery. That's about the level of anger you should get to warrant a death threat.
But it changed the way she lives.
I don't like going home at night by myself, if my husband's away, and I am more cautious now at night when I'm out. I don't want to walk distances by myself.
She says it's often difficult to deal with the constant flow of misogynistic abuse when it's sent anonymously online. Finance Minister and Deputy Leader of the National Party, Nicola Willis, agrees.
The B word and the C word, those words don't get thrown around for men, and they are inherently, I think, sexist words. I'd also observe that the people who often make these attacks choose anonymity to hide themselves, which I think demonstrates that they know that expressing their views in that way is socially unacceptable, but they go ahead and do it anyway.
But she says she's hesitant to follow the UK's lead in classifying a form of misogyny as extremism under any law change.
I'm inherently uncomfortable and cautious when it comes to any form of censorship or restrictions to free speech. I think we have to be very careful before we embark on any path like that. And I sincerely think that right now one of the most powerful things that we can do to stop this behaviour is simply calling it out.
A New Zealand SIS spokesperson said the agency is aware of the abhorrent misogynistic views being spread in the community every day. The spokesperson said the majority of extremist threats made online aren't acted on, but that the agency works with police to investigate individuals and groups which could pose a threat to national security.
There you go. One thing I want to say, and it's not to actually take away from what Nicola Willis just said, but she said the B word and C word aren't used for men. I mean, like, I'm not trying to say you're wrong and whitewash that conversation, but I think guys get called bitches and cunts all the time. I mean, like, especially like if you lived in Australia, you can be a good cunt. You know, it's a kind of saying, but maybe what she's saying is it's more aggressive when it's used towards women. I don't know.
I think there is a tone difference in the
right,
way
yeah.
that you know, certainly a lot like the stuff directed at say female politicians seems to be a lot more vicious, has a lot more venom behind it. Yeah, it's a hard thing to nail down. I think I just keep coming back to this sort of stuff that it should definitely come under the umbrella of hate speech. I think there is definitely a conversation about, you know, where the line is and how hard that is to pinpoint.
Mm.
Like, and then once you've pinpointed it, what are the steps? What happens then? We're obviously not talking about SWAT teams rappelling in and black bagging you off to a re-education camp. But where do you start to apply a bit of a handbrake or a redirection before we get to outward calls to violent action?
Yeah.
And people acting on those. Like, you go to some of the shittier parts of the internet, you know, 4chan and worse, into those incel the areas, you know, it's a feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the great things about the internet is it lets everybody find their own tribe, right? One of the worst things about the internet is it lets everyone find their tribe.
Yeah.
And if you have a feedback loop of people going, yeah, all women are bitches and cunts and none of them want to fuck me, so I'm just going to go on a murder rampage because it's all gone wrong for me.
Yeah,
You swap out female and put in blacks, Jews, whatever. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It is the same thing. It is someone that life has not been kind to. It is someone that has things that are not going their way for whatever reason, and they need someone to blame, and they need to get some power back through the wrong methods.
I remember saying a few times that, you know, it's interesting how the right is so interested in things like misogyny and how female politicians are treated now, because I well remember, and now I'm not saying it was Brooke Van Velden, but it was females from the right when they were talking about Jacinda Ardern going, oh, it's not too bad for me, that sort of thing. But I want to remind people that was very much, for fairness, Nicola Willis has always kind of called out what she said. She's called it out. But I just want to remind people, what date is this? This is January of last year. Okay, January of last year. And this is the now Prime Minister kind of pushing back against, maybe it's not about, the abuse is not about women. And then obviously, I suspect maybe some of the women in his cabinet got to him and said, yeah, you better pull your head in. And he does. But this was the origin story. This is the original thoughts of Christopher Luxon about, is there such a thing as misogyny?
It's right now. Bit of a thing yesterday with old Jacinda. That was a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, it was a shock.
I don't blame her. Not everyone was gassed for the Nats. This woman pulling the fingers, yelling, "National sucks." A middle finger much less threatening than the misogynistic abuse Jacinda Ardern received.
Did that play any role in your decision to walk away?
No, it did not. And my strong message to women in leadership and girls who may be considering leadership in the future, this is a place where foundation is being laid long before me to make it possible for us to be in these roles.
While Jacinda Ardern denies that the mass of misogynistic vitriol levelled at her fed into her decision to quit, it was prolific. Not that the national leader would acknowledge that this morning, telling Radio New Zealand it was about politics, not personality.
Do you think it is different for women, for female politicians?
Look, I'm not sure about that. I think,
Ask one.
What we're trying to make sure is that the country, you've seen other countries around the world where you actually get this just deep polarization of political views.
He should know better.
So this is important. I'm going to play it again because he does change his tune, but I always think it's important to get like the origin story of someone. So 18 months ago, when asked, do women in the public eye get it, harder than men do, his basic response was, don't think so, right? So this is his core belief that then got massaged by whatever PR company, and we'll see that before the end of the clip.
Do you think it is different for women, for female politicians?
Look, I'm not sure about that. I think, what we're trying to make sure is that the country, you've seen other countries around the world where you actually get this just deep polarization of political views.
He should know better. He's talked about being a role model in his own conduct. He could role model being a support for women and challenging and calling out that behaviour and saying it's not okay.
Mere hours later, Luxon walked back his comments.
I think there is an element of gendered abuse that happens with female politicians.
What's just so grating about this for me is at no point does he kind of go, oh, guys, look, I've had to think about it, and this morning I got it wrong. This is your absolute politician on talking points. He said what he believed, and then he said the opposite hours later without any reflection on what he'd said that morning, without any apology. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry this morning. I've evolved. I've had a chat with a few people and I was wrong. That part of the conversation never happened. He just went, da, 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 da. I don't think so. Oh, women, they have a really hard time. It's the ugliest part of politics. So this is his road to Damascus, talking of come to Jesus, his road to Damascus experience. And all of a sudden, he's woke.
Okay.
Mere hours later, Luxon walked back his comments.
I think there is an element of gendered abuse that happens with female politicians that is different from what we experience as men, I think.
Us men need to stand up and address it. It shouldn't be left to women to have to defend misogynist and sexist attacks on their own.
Luxon's deputy Nicola Willis isn't spared from the misogyny.
I think it's worst for me when people call into question my ability to be a good mother. That hurts.
There's no doubt about it. Yep, women get more gendered vilification, particularly online.
So the afternoon, did you hear the sentence? There's no doubt about it. That sounds like someone who has held this honest held belief for a long time. They know the research. They're aware of it. Oh, but a few hours ago, it was like, yeah, I'm not sure about that. And then there's no doubt about it. Like, I applaud people for evolving.
Hours ago.
Yeah. I applaud people for evolving, and I actually applaud Luxon for having the correct position now, but still just the disingenuous nature of why he's got there and no self-reflection at all. Remember, this was his original thoughts prior to being Prime Minister.
My ability to be a good mother. That hurts.
There's no doubt about it. Yep, women get more gendered vilification, particularly online.
Something Luxon should have known and acknowledged immediately.
Yeah, there you go. So there you go,
I
Joey. Just to add to the conversation, I wanted us to remember it's not quite as black and white as when the current right were in opposition. They didn't have such a big concern around it, as was evident there by Luxon. But, to her credit, and obviously why, because she's a victim of it, Nicola Willis on some level has always kind of played that. It's absolutely hard line. So good on her.
Yeah. My fantasy here is that he's made that statement and every woman in his party goes, "Hey boss, I'm just sending you through a folder that I keep on my desktop of all the emails that I get.
Yeah.
If you just read through it and maybe, if you get a chance to speak to the camera again, maybe bear that in mind." Like his first statement strikes me. It's never come across his mind. Why would he? Why would it?
Because he's not a victim of
it. And look, we see it sometimes here in the chat as well. It's easy. It's low hanging fruit. Like, and I think as much as I don't like Nicola Willis, as much as I think she's a terrible finance minister, and as much as I think she's made some horrible decisions, I'm not going to sit here and go, that fucking bitch must be a terrible mother. That's just, but you go in a comment section and you will see comments from people that are nominally on the left that will echo those comments and say something like it, and they need to be called out. And I'm not both siding this. I think female politicians on the left would get it a lot more.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying here is the left is not guilty, is not guilt-free on this either.